Ladies and gentlemen, Magnus Carlsen has played some absolutely historical games of chess in his time. And for today's video, we're going to be looking at three of his most immortal chess games, okay? His greatest chess games, not necessarily the ones where he played with the highest accuracy, but the ones with the highest stakes, and the most psychology, and the most daring moves, the most attacking chess, the most defensive chess, whatever it is. I have chosen three games that are three of my personal favourites, whereby Magnus is just an absolute machine. Okay? And it starts off against Vishy Anand, arguably the greatest player of his own generation. This is like generations colliding right now. And I believe this is game number 2 of their World Championship match in I don't even know. I'm just going to pull a date from nowhere, like 2014 or something. That's probably not right. I'm just making things up. But Magnus has the white pieces. Anand has the black pieces. And guys, if you do go on to enjoy this video, please leave a like and subscribe. I'm not going to beg anymore. That's all I'll say on the matter. Game starts with e4, okay? This is about as normal a move as has ever been played in a chess game. We get e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop to b5. This is the Spanish game, the Ruy Lopez, been played since like the 1500s, still getting decisive results. And the most common response here, at the top level, is the old Steinitz with deep... No, I'm joking, of course it's not. It's the Berlin defense. Everyone knows that. Black plays Berlin against the Ruy Lopez. That is just what happens at the top level. It's very rare they go into anything else. Obviously, there's mainline theory that goes somewhat like this, and then the knight comes out, or the bishop goes to e7. But the Berlin is always played, guys. Okay, the Berlin is what's normal. We get d3 played. You can also short castle here. And then, if they were to take, then you play rook e1, threatening on this file. But this line with... Sorry, I should say this line with d3 is more commonly played now. It's much more solid. Bishop to c5, short castles, d6, and then the rook comes over to e1. Now, you can see these random arrows on screen. The most common move in this position is actually c3 to prepare the move d4. Which would then kick the bishop back. That's why you saw those arrows earlier. But we don't actually get that. We get rook e1, which is fine. Short castles from Vishy. And then we get a trade, which double stacks Vishy's pawns on the c-file. Which looks very uncomfortable, but Stockfish just says it's completely fine. Maybe it will be an issue at some stage later on in the game. So they just continue to develop their pieces to more optimal squares. The bishop steps back, which does look a little bit strange, but I guess the idea is to maybe prepare a square for your knight to move to open up your light squared bishop. Could be wrong on that, but that's sort of what it looks like. Magnus plays a4, Vishy plays a5, and then we get a trade. The bishop and knights come off the board. I think here you're probably better off taking with the knight and leaving the pawns double stacked just to open up that bishop, but taking back with the pawn, it just is the most human looking thing in the world, isn't it? We get d4 striking in the centre, queen c7, and rook a3. Now, this rook is probably looking to swing over to the centre after it's sort of like everything's traded off and there's an open d file. Or it could even be looking to swing over to the king side. Like, rook a3 is just a brilliant move, preparing for later on. Knight jumps back, and then we get this trade. So the d file is now open. Knight h4 is played, rook to d8, so the queen has to move, and it goes to h5. And this is where we start to see some brilliant attacking chess from Magnus. He's very well rounded. He's known as a brilliant defensive player, but also, if you make the most marginal of mistakes, he's going to pounce on it, and he's going to attack. We get the move f6, okay, which is actually the best move. It looks a little bit strange, but worth noting, white doesn't have a light squared bishop anymore. So it's going to be very difficult to exploit on this diagonal. So f6, just a brilliant defensive move. Knight jumps over to f5. We get bishop to e6. And now the rook swings over to g3. And it does look very scary for black, but I think he'll hold on. Knight g6 is played. And then we get h4. And it's looking like the pawns are going to push, and we're just going to get an all-out war on this king side. Knight now has to move. It jumps attacking the queen, so bishop takes, rook has to move, so it goes to c3. c5 is played, And then we get rook e6. Rook to b8 is given as a mistake because of the move rook to c4, which Magnus finds. Maybe looking to just overload pressure on these pawns, especially if you can play queen g4. Let's just say black played a random move. Queen g4 looks so strong because you threaten this pawn, because you can just take this pawn because this can't take back because of the pin. But you also overload this pawn. I mean, it's not given as the best move in the position, but the idea of playing queen g4 is always going to be lingering there. Queen goes to d7, and we get the move king h2, just so there's no sort of back rank check, whereby they'd be forking the king and also winning a pawn. So king h2 is played, rook to f8, and then we get a double stack of the rooks on the e-file. Queen goes back, b5, and then the move b3, which looks so unbelievably natural. But now the b pawn's meant to take on a4. See, this is actually given as the top engine move, but it's given as a mistake when it's played. So I'm not overly sure why that is, because Stockfish on this chess.com is saying it's the best move. So I guess it's like different chess engines colliding and having differing opinions. So basically, just ignore the mistake on this pawn take. It's actually the best move. Rook slides over. Magnus says danger levels and attacks the queen. Queen has to move. And then the move queen f3 is played, which looks very natural. I mean, you're still defending this pawn, still putting a lot of pressure on this pawn. But we finally get this rook trade. f3 check is played, so you of course have to block with g3. Let's just say you were to move for some reason. You see the eval bar completely drop. Like, this looks like a very unpleasant position for white. So g3, you just block the check. And then h5 is played. And guys, would you believe me if I told you this is where the game ends? h5 looks so natural. Like, you just completely lock down white's position. You can't make any advancements if you're white. But like I said earlier, if you make the slightest of mistakes, Magnus is always going to be there to pounce on it. And guys, a lot of you would already have seen it. It's the move queen to b7. And Vishy has to resign because you can't defend this pawn. Like, your best move here is just to take, otherwise there's force mate. And it's like Magnus is now just a queen versus a rook. Like, he's going to, like, you don't stand a chance. You don't stand a chance. So this is one of Magnus's absolutely most dominating wins. It was like perfect positional play the whole way through. And then Vishy Anand made one mistake, and it basically cost him the world championship. This one mistake with h5 allowing the queen to infiltrate on b7. The pressure, what pressure? Okay, pressures for tyres. Magnus Carlsen feels no pressures. Game number 2, you beautiful people. Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces again, going up against MVL. A very formidable opponent at the time. I believe he was world number 5. This isn't a world championship game, but it is a very dominating game, okay? It's about 40 moves of absolute hell for MVL, okay? Game starts with c4, c5, and we just get a very symmetrical English opening. And the first deviation is this move e6. So a very symmetrical opening where neither player has really taken the centre. They've both fianchettoed their kingside pawns, both developed their knight over to the c-file. And outside of this, I mean, it's just positional perfection from both of them in the opening. Bishop to e3, again, it just looks like such a strange move. Why would you ever block your e-pawn here? But it's actually just the best move. Like, it's just positional perfection until we get to b5. Because now you can actually take this pawn. And after you recapture, Magnus takes again, and he's now just up a pawn. The queen comes over, attacking the other queen, but the knight just drops back. And Magnus is sort of saying here, well, what the hell was that? I'm now up a pawn. Why did you do that? But MVL's argument is, hey, I'm going to bring my rook over at some stage. And look at the pressure I'm going to be having on your queen side. So that's the sort of trade-off that he's going for here. Rook goes to b8. Magnus recognises this and says, okay, maybe I should bring some reinforcements over to the queen side of the board, because both MVL's rooks are now here and it's quite terrifying. b3 is played. And then we get the move e5. Now, this looks like such a strange looking move, but the position kind of felt like MVL had to play e5 here, because if he didn't take the initiative in the centre, Well, Magnus is going to look to trade off this dark square bishop and then look to take the centre himself. So it feels like MVL has to take the centre here, but this is just a huge mistake. I mean, not only are you blocking your bishop in, but you're also potentially allowing for some outposts here at some stage in the game where the bishop and knight combine. And it just looks a little bit uncomfortable because there's no pawns either side that could attack d5 now anymore. So it's very scary. Bishop to h6 is played, knight to d4, and Magnus takes the bishop. MVL takes the knight on f3, and Magnus of course takes back with the pawn. And the reason you take back with the pawn here is because, well, MVL has a monster centre. If you take back with the bishop, you can't challenge that monster centre. So you take back with the pawn, preparing the move f4 to challenge that monster centre, okay? King takes back, and then f4 is played, queen steps back, and Magnus takes, okay? Because you have to deal with this centre. Knight a4 is played, and then we get knight to d7, rook c3, rook to b4. We get the move g4 played, bishop to e6, because you have to drop back, of course. And then this absolute brilliant move by Magnus Carlsen, just winning a pawn, okay? That's the marginal levels at this level of chess, like world number 1 versus world number 5. Magnus is just slowly, subtly dominating this man. Like, knight takes, this position looks so weird. Like, this pawn is defended twice. Magnus only attacks it twice. So normally that would mean Magnus is going to lose the exchange here. But he doesn't, because after knight takes, rook takes the knight. Okay? And let's just say hypothetically MVL were to take this rook. Well, then Magnus takes this rook, and he's just up 2 pawns in this position. There's nothing he can do. There's nothing anyone can do against Magnus when he's up that much. So in this position, MVL doesn't take the rook, and instead takes the pawn on b3, which is the best move to give him credit. And Magnus, of course, can't take back because there's this check. So very, very tricky position. Magnus has to play perfectly. And in this position, he just takes this rook. Bishop takes back, of course, because if queen were to take back, then this rook would be hanging because you can't now take this rook. So bishop, of course, has to take. And then Magnus brings his rook over to c1. Rook takes the pawn. And now pawns are completely equal. And we sort of got to ask the question here to Magnus of, why have you got yourself in this position? Like, you were up so many pawns, the game was basically over. What have you done? But Magnus always has a plan. Queen to e2, bishop to e6, queen takes the pawn with check. So Magnus gets another pawn back, king goes to g8, and then we get the move rook to b1, maybe setting up some sort of trade-off on this b8 square at some stage, potentially, especially after the rook goes back to d8. Because now you play rook b8, takes and takes with check, and now you bring your bishop to the fight. Now this looks like Magnus just completely hung a bishop, but when MVL takes this bishop, there's this check on e5 forking the king and bishop. So you do win it back, blocks with the f6 pawn, which looks very strange. Magnus, of course, picks up the bishop, while defending his pawn on a2, by the way. Like an absolute gorgeous sequence of moves from Magnus. h5 is played, Magnus takes the pawn, and instead of taking here and just being up another pawn, because that doesn't work because you can actually take here on a2, Magnus decides to give a check on d7. King steps forwards, a4 is played, queen goes to e2, and this is just a position Magnus is now going to convert. Okay, he's just going to continue to push his a-pawn. There's nothing you can do because Magnus defends this f3 square. So, like, let's say you gave this check for some random reason, Magnus just takes back. And if you dare queen trade, the pawn's going to promote. So you just can't do that. So instead, queen c4 is played, and after king f3, MVL is forced to resign. Literally perfect chess the whole way through from Magnus. Like, quite literally perfect chess. At no stage was there ever any doubt. It was just so dominating. And that's what he just suffocates you. There is nothing you can do. Guys, for game number 3, we have a very historical game of chess. This is the longest ever World Championship match. And it is played between Magnus Carlsen and Jan Nepomniachtchi. Now, these two have played in 2 World Championship matches, Magnus getting the better of Jan both times. But wow, This game, I believe, is 136 moves long. I'm just going to check. Yeah, 136 moves. This is the highest echelon of chess that is possible of reaching. The longest World Championship game, and Magnus sacrifices his queen at some stage. Like, you guys have to stick around for this. We get d4, knight to f6, knight f3, and we go into sort of a queen's gambit at some stage, I believe. Or maybe I've just made that up. No, that was a different game I'm looking at. I tell a lie. This is, of course, just a King's Indian game. b3 is played, c5 is played, and we finally get a trade. We get our first trade on move number 7. c4 is played, just locking in the position. And then queen c2. And, like, this whole World Championship game between Jan and Magnus, Magnus was sacrificing so many pawns in the opening and exchanging that for his initiative. Like, that is sort of how modern chess is developing. Like, people always talk about how openings have deviated from taking the centre to sort of fianchettoing your bishops early and then battling for the centre later. Like, you look at like a Nimzo Larsen, for example. But Magnus also introduced this idea of just sacrificing pawns in the openings for, like, instant initiative. And it really paid off against Jan. Queen e7, and then knight to d2. Now, like, Jan can take another pawn and just be up 2 pawns. It's very weird. Knight c6, and now Magnus recaptures. We get b5, so the knight, of course, has to move. Jan jumps his knight forwards, attacking the queen. Queen has to move. And it's just all sort of developing moves now, where they very subtly, we get a trade-off on the move, on f6, and it looks weird to take back with the pawn. Like, it's given us this weird, like, puzzle animation here, but like, if you don't, like, you're going to take with the queen, and we're going to get this awful pawn structure anyway, whereby there's a semi-open g-file, and Magnus's king is much safer. So Jan opts to keep the queens on the board and just take with the pawn initially. I don't see an issue with it, but the engine hates it. Whatever. Rook c1, taking over the open file. Knight jumps forwards, knight takes, bishop takes. Of course, queen cannot take because there is currently a rook eyeing up this bishop. So Magnus moves his queen, and the light square bishops are traded off. Queen to b7 check, king just has to step back. And now Jan's queen takes a very central role here. And the position looks very scary for Magnus. Like, Jan's clearly going to bring his other rook over as well. And then everything is developed. Like, although Magnus's king is a lot safer, Jan's queen is literally just controlling the game here. So we get queen to c2, we get a5, rook to d1, king g7, rook d2, and then we get rook a to c8. And this is where the game starts to implode a little bit for Jan, because Magnus takes the rook. I don't think Jan was expecting Magnus to go into this line. But Magnus is now up material because he's +1 in the position, okay? Because materially, piece-wise, Magnus's pieces are worth 13 points material. And then we have 12 for Jan, 9 and 3, okay? Versus 5, 5 and 3. So the 2 rooks here could seriously cause some damage, but queens are so tricky. Like, never ever go into this if you're a beginner or an intermediate player, even like early advanced. This is so difficult. Like, 2 rooks against a queen is so difficult because queens are so tricky. Queen goes to d5 and it just controls so many squares. b4 is played because Magnus doesn't want to lose a pawn, and then a4 is played. Jan just saying, I'm going to set up a fortress and my queen is just going to be infiltrating left, right and centre. h5 is a bit of a dodgy move because of king h2. And now Magnus at some stage could potentially look to just start marching. And it's very uncomfortable for Jan. Bishop goes down, rook comes to attack the queen, queen has to go back to d6. Again, it's very uncomfortable. Rook d1 is a bit of a blunder from Magnus, in all honesty. Obviously you can't really take this bishop, because then the queen takes, and like this pawn is hanging. The queen's threatening to infiltrate the position, just for anyone wondering. So rook to d1, bishop takes on a3, and it looks very uncomfortable for Magnus's pawn structure here. Bishop and queen are just going to try and infiltrate together. e5 is played, we get rook c2, queen d5, and then we get rook d to d2, okay? So the rooks are connected on this second rank. this bishop kind of feels pretty stuck because the knight defends. It's very uncomfortable here. Obviously, in this position, let's just say you went here. I believe you can actually just take this pawn on b4, because if knight takes, then queen just takes this rook. So the rooks have to stay connected, okay? That's why rook endgames against a queen is so tricky. I'm about to sneeze. I think. I can't tell. Oh, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. You know when you've got a tingling sensation in your nose? I think it's gone. Queen infiltrates on b3. Attacks the bishop. And now it's like, where the hell does the bishop go? So e4 is played. Danger levels from Jan. He says, look, my bishop's dead. So maybe I'm going to take your knight instead. But knight c5 is played, attacks the queen. Queen takes on b4. And now we get a beautiful sequence of moves. Psych. Knight takes on e4 is a mistake. Queen doesn't opt to take, so then you'd lose the bishop. Queen b3. Rooks stay connected. And then we get a shuffling of pieces for a little while, whereby Jan threatens to just keep pushing this a-pawn, and it does look very scary. But Magnus is trying to now position his knight to a square in which can attack a3. But it occupies the centre, okay? And when you have a knight of this value occupying all of these squares, I'm just going to draw every arrow. It's not worth 3 pieces anymore. 3 points of material, I should say. This knight is basically a rook. So Magnus says, I'm actually just going to take this pawn on a3. And you're not going to be able to take back right away, because there's a much better move on the board. Whereby Jan finds this brilliant move of taking on h4, because this pawn is pinned. So obviously you can't recapture because of this check. So beautiful little find. King steps back. And instead of taking the rook, again, Jan plays queen to e4. Rook steps up, bishop to e5, knight to e2. And again, this is still just a drawn position. Queen c2, rook steps up, attacking the queen, defending the knight. And you'll notice Magnus is slowly positioning his pieces, except the pawns, on light squares. Because at some stage, this dark square bishop, it's just going to be worthless, okay? Because all Magnus' pieces are occupying light squares. The pawns are on dark squares, taking squares away from the bishop. And it's going to be a game of slowly manoeuvring Magnus' pawns forwards to look to promote. And it's so tricky for Jan to really do anything. You'll notice they're just sort of shuffling pieces in a bit of a nonsensical order until we get the move bishop to a7. And this is just a bad move. But Jan didn't have much time on the board. And it's very tricky now because rook e7, I should say, attacks this bishop. And Jan plays bishop c5. And after rook e5, Jan is not only very low on time, I know you guys can't see it, but he's very low on time. And he's in a position where he only has one move to keep the draw alive every move. And so it's very uncomfortable because after queen to d3, Magnus plays rook to b7, looking to put some pressure, perhaps on this king, while also attacking all these pawns. Queen goes to c2, and then we get rook to b8, rook to b5, I should say, sorry, attacking the bishop. And it's like this bishop has no squares anymore. It's really running out of squares. Rook a5, attacks the bishop here, rook b5, and now Magnus takes the pawn. Queen steps up, attacking the rook. This is just a beautiful move. This is just an absolutely beautiful move, simplifying the game down as much as possible. Because when Jan takes, you can just play rook to b7 check, forking the king and the bishop. King step forward to g6, and Magnus, of course, takes this bishop. Now, Magnus is still up 1 point of material in what is a very tricky position, okay? We are currently 90 moves in. White's king is completely safe. Okay, there is never going to be any chance of Magnus losing this game, but there will be chances to win it if Jan doesn't play perfect chess, and it's so difficult to do in low time. Rook goes over to d6, we get king g7, rook steps forward looking to cut squares off from the king, and you're going to notice that slowly Magnus is going to maneuver his pieces in a way in which his pawns can then start pushing. Like, I'm going to fly through here, but we're on move 100 in a world championship game. Rook c7 check, and you'll notice, like, slowly but surely the pieces are being positioned to just start marching. e4 is finally played. Queen steps over to h1, and Jan is going to really struggle to defend this position because eventually gives a check, wins the pawn back. Eventually, these two pawns are going to cause some serious damage. King is just floating about doing nothing because there's nothing this king can do. Stockfish gives this position as a draw, but like good luck defending this pawn push. Because after white here has set up very good coordinated pieces with the rook here, the knight defending future squares for these pawns. Queen gives a check, king steps up to f3. Now there is one more check, queen d1, but Magnus just blocks. Queen b3, and the king is rerouting. It's going to go round the outside, and Magnus is now going to start pushing. Gives a check, gives another check, and plays e5. We are 129 moves in, and the king is now marching up the side of the board. This is a huge mistake because of king h4, and obviously you can't take any of these pieces, so Magnus takes the opportunity to start marching forwards. Queen h6, you can block with the knight, taking even more squares. Look at all of this which Magnus now controls. Where is the queen going? It's in such a tight-knit space. Queen h7, e6 is played, and after queen to g6, Magnus finds the beautiful rook to f7. Because there's nothing you can do. You can't take this pawn because of this fork. Like, it's just absolutely disgusting. If you take here, take here, take here, you're just in a completely losing endgame. So Jan has to play king to d8. f5 is played. Queen goes back, and after knight to g7, Jan Nepomniachtchi finally resigns after 136 moves of chess. Absolutely insane game. This is the longest World Championship match in history, and I think it will stay that way for a very, very long time. Guys, that's going to do it for today. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe. Magnus might be the GOAT, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.